go to our next panelist, which is Dr. Abhishek Sharma. Dr. Abhishek Sharma is a lead pharma and healthcare analyst at IIFL Institutional Equities. He has worked in healthcare and finance for the last 17 years. He is a doctor from Maulana Azad Medical College, and then he has done his graduation from IIM. Dr. Abhishek, you have been closely tracking healthcare sector for a very long time now. I have read a lot of your reports and they are wonderful on the sub-sectors, the pharmaceutical, the diagnostic, the healthcare hospital. So a lot of reports that you publish are fantastic. Can you please share your insights on two current critical segments of healthcare, pharmaceutical and diagnostic? And why I'm saying these are two critical and not hospital and maybe others. Everything is critical right now. Healthcare as a sector globally has become very critical for all the governments, stakeholders, communities. Everybody has realized that healthcare has to be at the top. If you don't have healthy nation, you cannot achieve your economic goals. But in healthcare, I think pharmaceutical, why I'm saying we need your inputs and updates, because vaccine, I think, is very critical to end this trauma and torture that everybody is facing and this crisis that everybody is facing. So we want to understand that particular aspect. And also another important aspect, which I think some of the previous speaker, particularly Sunil, has mentioned about the self-sustainability. And in pharmaceutical, unfortunately, we are not self-sustainable. And it will be a very bad situation for us if this continues. So we wanted your inputs on particularly the pharmaceutical, and then comes diagnostic. Diagnostic again is extremely important till the vaccine emerges in the short term. But overall in the long term also, diagnostic plays a very important role in the healthcare industry. So over to you, Dr. Abhishek, for your views.
Thanks, Gaurav. Thanks for that introduction. Thank you for all the panelists for giving a very comprehensive and information-rich presentation. So I'll talk about pharma and diagnostics, as Gaurav mentioned. I'll try to sort of include some COVID-related data points around each of the sectors, just to highlight some of the things that I'm trying to say. So I think as far as finished formulation is concerned, clearly India remains and will only emerge stronger as the hub of global manufacturing. For the US generics market, for example, we supply 40% of the total generic volumes, and those volumes, the volume share has only been going higher. It would continue to go higher. Right now, if you see the kind of drugs that are being pursued in order to find a treatment, these are all repurposed drugs. And whatever you look at, ultimately the manufacturing of that, a large part of manufacturing of that would eventually come to India. HCQS, hydroxychloroquine, is a prime example. Everybody has seen Trump's tweet. The kind of dependence that people have on India only got highlighted. Even if you talk about the Gilead drug, Remdesivir, Gilead is primarily a virtual company. They would rely on manufacturing partners, and right now they're getting their stuff manufactured, API manufactured in China. But my sense is that once Indian companies are able to offer them alternate sources of manufacturing, perhaps Remdesivir, if it gets approved, will also start getting manufactured in India. If you also look at Gilead's, prior arrangement for Sovaldi for emerging markets, anyways, the license would come to Indian manufacturers. As far as vaccine is concerned, you've seen Serum Institute has committed that they would sort of try to scale up some of the vaccines that are in the pipeline right now, including the Oxford trial. What India lacks presently is clearly on the innovation side. So we are dependent on external partners. We are not doing real R&D of our own. That has been, the kind of thing that we operate from. But as far as the manufacturing of any of these things is concerned, my sense is a large part of that share would come to India. Coming to some geopolitical situation, you also saw Peter Navarro, who's the director of trade and manufacturing policy for the Trump administration, clearly stating that they want to reduce their dependency on China, which basically means that a large part of the API dependency that India also has to China has to kind of get de-risked by some of that API manufacturing shifting to India. For critical APIs, US obviously would want the facilities be set up on their own geography, and I guess the natural partners of choice for them would be Indian manufacturers. Yeah, the Indian government has also announced a 10,000 crore policy, because of which you would see that there are some 60 to 70 APIs identified. Uh, Within the next 2 to 3 years, they will start getting manufactured in India, which will thereby reduce a lot of dependency that India has on China. So my sense is overall, these are very good times for pharma, as Sunil mentioned before me, and that's why the investors are reacting to the kind of good news that this sector is seeing, after a very long time. Now, also, I wanted to point out that big pharma facilities across the world are in shutdown right now, which also would lead to global shortages of medicines. And what we have seen in HCQS, you can expect that ultimately Indian manufacturers will be required or asked to step in to fill in some of those product shortages. And my sense is that there are Indian pharma companies in my coverage who are basically keeping a track of these supply chain situations on a daily basis. And if they see a shortage kind of a situation, they are ready to step in. So Indian companies are also playing, that kind of a service aspect to it, and at the same time, which makes commercial sense. Clearly, there are near-term issues. For example, when India GDP takes a hit, pharma consumption in India goes down. My sense is, more impact on antibiotic and acute care, but chronic like diabetes, etc. I think the impact should be lesser. But overall, pharma growth would be soft this year in India. But these are transient issues. Even more transient is what we are seeing in supply chain, which is basically lack of trucking and lack of availability of manpower in facilities. But I presume that by next month, most of these things would get resolved. Basically, good times for Indian pharma. Coming to diagnostics, what India right now is doing is about 40,000 tests per day. And if I look at testing per million data, which I just pulled out, so India tests per million right now, cumulative is about 462. US is at 15,000. So there's a big gap that we basically need to sort of cover. India has to test much more aggressively if we have to have the confidence to be able to come out of this lockdown pretty soon. And there is also state level disparity. So 45%. So there are 9 states which account for 45% of total population, which account for total 80%, 88% of India's caseload. Whereas if you look at UP, Bihar, and West Bengal, they account for 30% of India's population, but only 8.7% of total caseload. So these statewide disparities also have to go, and poorer states have to start testing much more aggressively for India to develop some sort of confidence to come out of the lockdown. As far as private labs are concerned, we are basically seeing we are seeing a significant drop in footfalls. So out of the original, only 10 to 20% kind of footfalls are happening. Some of this will get compensated by COVID testing that the private labs are now undertaking, but my sense is it won't be sufficient. Diagnostics, I guess, there is some tough times ahead. 2-3 quarters will continue to be tough. COVID testing price, again, just wanted to point out, government has fixed the ceiling of 4,500 rupees. But my sense is there is pricing pressure there. So, the margin that companies could make on some of these things would continue to get lower. Final thing I wanted to say is that as far as testing device, testing kits, etc., is concerned, there has been a near complete import dependence. But in during this crisis, there has been a heartening kind of a move. My lab has emerged as a leading supplier of testing kits for RT-PCR tests. So we are seeing, some sort of reduction of import dependence and emergence of Indian companies in this space. So, there are clearly good things which have happened to pharma and diagnostics. And I believe that, Indian companies would rise to the occasion to be able to fulfill the service requirements. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Abhishek. And I think very important points. And one question I think, so I would request all panelists, there are questions in the question and answer section. So please, you can go through it. And in the end, I'll be asking you all the questions. But Abhishek, on the chat itself, there was a question. So I'll maybe ask before we proceed. So Swadesh Behra from Boston Scientific has a specific question for you. When we are talking about the shifting of the manufacturing base from China to India, what fiscal and non-fiscal interventions should government provide to accelerate this change? And I think it is very important change because we as a country need more manufacturing to come to India because we create more employment opportunities. But what is the government support that I think can make it happen? And Abhishek, this will go to you, and then maybe I will request Sunil also to maybe for 2 minutes just talk about this. So Abhishek.
Yeah, so basically, see, some movement has happened. Indian government has announced a 10,000 crore scheme to basically set up API production parks in India. I think if you look at more than the money, what happens is, see, right now there's a near complete dependence. I would say 80 to 90% dependence on China, whether it is related to API or key starting materials, either direct or derived, something or the other would eventually come from China. I don't think we can take that 80% kind of dependence down to even 40. There are things in which we just can't achieve. We can't match the kind of scale that China has already built. But if there are critical APIs, let's suppose there are 70 to 100 critical APIs that a country needs to be fully independent, and we are able to sort of bring those in and try to vertically integrate their production as much as possible. What you basically need is ecosystem. You need companies who are looking to invest, try to vertically integrate into these. You need manpower, you need whole host of chemists. India used to have a lot of chemistry skills, a lot of API manufacturing advantages even 15, 20 years back. And then basically all that expertise essentially shifted to formulation, and China clearly won in the API side. So I would say policy incentives clearly, as and when government announces, plus the API tech parks, the Indian entrepreneurs have to essentially come together. If they see the economic merit, I clearly see that there is an economic merit today. When I speak to Indian companies, Indian formulation manufacturers, they don't want to source everything from China. They're basically saying that if there is an Indian source, we would like to take at least 30% of our requirement from the Indian source just to keep him alive, so that we don't see the kind of supply shocks that we've seen. These kind of events eventually could possibly get India back into the ecosystem, which could lead to the resurgence of API manufacturing.
Thanks, Dr. Abhishek. And maybe Sunil, if you can also put your point on this, particularly on the government support on how to accelerate this change.
Yeah, so as Abhishek mentioned, government has already started. So while it was always in the offing of coming out with incentives to promote API, because all governments are now realizing that dependence on China is not good for the industry. So it's not something that's new in the mind of the government. But now, obviously, with this COVID, since there was a significant amount of supply chain breakdown, the government has now started to take steps. The first of which, Abhishek mentioned. What I also hear is that sooner than later, there will be an import duty. I don't know what is going to be the name, but some people are saying it will be a COVID 15% kind of an import duty, basically to encourage domestic production and consumption of APIs. Also, what I hear is that the norms for the effluent treatment plant has been lowered down a bit just to manage the current situation. But I guess we should look at long-term opportunity, which is how do you incentivize promoters to start API production in India. And couple of ways it can be done is there is a parallel import which is happening. So even while there is a ban or a significant amount of import duty, a parallel import through different structures are happening in the countries. That needs to be clamped down. The second way to do this is that lots of foreign governments have now realized that reliance on China is becoming tricky for everybody. So India is in a very good spot to go and take up that opportunity. So some countries which will benefit out of this, what you call outflow from China are going to be Vietnam, Thailand, and India. If I look at the pharma sector, so the government should be proactive in taking it up with those foreign countries, including US and some of the larger European countries, to see if there can be a joint program to help promote API production in India. The third is there should be preference for companies which have the entire back end or the upstream localized upstream in the pharma sector as far as government purchases are concerned, because government is a big purchaser, be it in the retail form or be it in the hospitals. So these are some of the big measures that the government can take, to promote localized production of API.
Thanks, Sunil. And now we will come on to